welcome along to the Acid Trash Jamboree and to another collection snapshot video where I talk about a varied bunch of albums from the collection united by the fact that they share the same storage box. Today I'll be covering everything from sensitive acoustic and folk rock stuff to jazz fusion and altogether more indescribable experimental freak music. So if that sounds interesting, strap yourself in and let's get started. First up today we have Originals, which is a budget double disc collection featuring 3 mid to late 70s albums by singer-songwriter Michael Chapman, plus another album's worth of outtakes and demos. Personally speaking, as far as UK cult hero acoustic guitar slingers go, I came around to Chapman much later than most of the others, so I've barely scraped the surface with his rather large discography, though I do at least own his first 8 LPs in some shape or form. And yeah, as far as these ones go, Deal Gone Down, Savage Amusement, and The Man Who Hated Mornings, after a decade plus of thinking they were all pretty humdrum affairs, it seems they finally started to grow on me. Okay, so in his latter years, Chapman started to find favour with a bunch of younger American artists, like Jack Rose, Pelt, and the No Neck Blues Band, which makes sense as, despite being from deepest, darkest Yorkshire, his stuff always drew heavily from US music. And yeah, this collection provides us with a whistle-stop tour through pretty much every root style that you can think of. Folk, blues, country, ragtime, jazz, and even gospel. Yeah, this is particularly evident on Savage Amusement, which features a full gospel chorus on several songs, the production being handled by root specialist Don Nix. That said, weirdly enough, the lineups that Chapman pulled together for these recording sessions read like a who's who of the UK rock and folk scenes, with appearances from the likes of Bridget St. John, assorted members of Steel Eye Span, Keith Hartley, Andy Latimer from Camel, pedal steel wizard BJ Cole, and of course Chapman's old mate Mick Ronson. Now, there's far too much material here for me to describe absolutely everything, so just to rattle off some highlights off the top of my head. From Deal Gone Down, I enjoy the Roy Harper-esque modal folk rock of Party Pieces, and the melancholic Another Season song in particular, while Savage Amusement features the soft, gooey yacht ballad Crocky Hill Disaster, and the proggy epic Stranger, as well as a heavy, swamped-out remake of It Didn't Work Out, a song originally tackled on his Rainmaker LP. Over on the other disc, things like the loping, country-fried confessional I'm Sober Now, and the swinging, jazzy title song from The Man Who Hated Mornings would most probably feature on the shortlist for a Chapman best-of CDR mix if I still bothered to make such things. So yeah, whilst I like it a lot more than I used to, there's still a bunch of songs across the collection that will probably never do anything for me, especially the more good time, boogie-centric efforts, whilst the outtakes and demos tagged on to the end don't offer up anything too exciting. As you can see, the artwork leaves a lot to be desired too, with the reproductions of the original LP sleeves shrunk down to the point that you can barely see them. Still, if you can put up with the cruddy visuals, not to mention a couple of very noticeable audio flaws on disc 1, then this is still worth picking up if you find it cheap. We move on to a trio of albums by Keith Christmas, who's another one of those UK acoustic cult heroes that I came to pretty late in the game. His debut, Stimulus, first came out in 1969. And yeah, his backing band here comprised of most of the members of the excellent Mighty Baby. Overall, Stimulus isn't a million miles away from the mellow, melancholic sound that Mighty Baby would go on to explore themselves on their second LP, A Jug of Love, Christmas & Co. offering up a clutch of world-weary, country-infused folk rock tunes like Metropolis and the gorgeous Travelling Down, alongside the novelty period piece Bedsit Two-Step and a Celtic solo guitar showcase entitled Roundabout. Those in search of something a bit trippier might enjoy the moody groover Iceman, whilst the epic Trial and Judgment closes things out with a nimble-fingered raga workout. Chuck in some excellent quality live recordings from around the same time, and the amusing medieval send-up Ballad of Robin Head, and you've got a worthwhile little package. I don't own the follow-up Fable of the Wings, so the next one I have is Pygmy from 1971. This is a record of two halves, as they say. The first half, finding Keith preempting Spinal Tap's David St. Hubbins by over a decade, performing a collection of his acoustic numbers with the London Symphony Orchestra. The strings were arranged by Robert Kirby, who was the go-to guy for the folkies back then. His orchestrations also adorning amazing albums by Vashti Bunyan, Sheila MacDonald, Ralph McTell, and most famously Nick Drake. Christmas is in a particularly melancholy mood with these tunes, starting off with an even more yearning version of Travelling Down, then reaching a peak of weepiness with Even Song. The solo number Spanky is a touch more light-hearted, playing out like something off an early Joni Mitchell album, the side concluding with the syrupy Poem, a short ballad in the mould of Clifford T. Ward. In complete contrast, the second half is a full band affair, the players exploring proggy psychedelia and rustic, Big Pink-style folk rock in equal measure. The track Song for a Survivor sporting a spirited instrumental jam-out, whilst the closer, Forest and the Shore, is bolstered by a haunting choral arrangement, again courtesy of Robert Kirby. These last two also feature piano and organ contributions from Rod Argent of the Zombies, one of my absolute favourite 60s groups. All throughout this second side, we hear hints of the soulful stylings that Christmas would adopt heavily later in the 70s, though as we'll get onto, this wasn't always for the best. Yeah, I don't own the follow-up to Pygmy, Brighter Day from 1974, so I've no idea what he was up to on that. However, by the time of Stories from the Human Zoo from 2 years later, his sound was almost unrecognisable from the early stuff. Yeah, if you're expecting to hear something altogether more strange and beguiling, just going off the weird, spooky front cover, then prepare to be disappointed. The album kicking off with a clutch of wishy-washy soft rock songs and anemic attempts at R&B, which don't convince in the slightest. The country-flavoured ballad Souvenir Affair and The Last of the Dinosaurs are a touch more listenable, but melodically they're 10 a penny, after which things improve quite a bit, with Christmas seemingly taking influence from Gene Clark's No Other, and cooking up a similarly eclectic musical stew, taking in funk, soul, rock, and adding a few splashes of psychedelia along the way, without ever quite hitting the highs of that classic. So yeah, it took a few plays to finally come around to this one. Even so, due to its weak first half, it's never going to be something that I'll be reaching for very often. Still, if you enjoy the more emotive end of the UK acoustic boom, people like Duncan Brown and the aforementioned Clifford T. Ward and Nick Drake, then Christmas's early work at least is definitely worth checking out. And now for something completely different. Yeah, the lone album by the experimental US group Cromagnon, originally self-titled on its vinyl release in 1969. This particular CD reissue goes by the name of Orgasm, though there's an earlier pressing titled Cave Rock out there too, some of which was apparently transferred to disc at the wrong speed. Now, this is one of those albums that's gained quite a reputation over the decades due to how ahead of its time it was. Specifically the opening track, Caledonia, which, with its propulsive backing of massed bagpipes, fuzz guitar, and heavy, pounding war drums, overlaid with sinister rasping and whispering, sounds uncannily like the premature birth of blackened folk metal. Of course, I'm not the first to mention this, and I certainly won't be the last. But yeah, if you're a metalhead and you've never heard this track, then you may just get a kick out of it. The rest of the album isn't nearly as traditionally musical as the opener. The pair of percussion and vocal pieces that follow bring into mind the drug-drenched, communal freakouts of Amon-Dul, the first half then concluding with Fantasy, a bonkers sound collage comprising of assorted layers of voices, disturbing synth drones, and detuned radio crackle. For those who despise all things avant-garde, Crow of the Black Tree is often cited as the one other listenable piece here. Its obsessive, minimalistic minor key acoustic guitar strumming and dramatic drum hits, giving the song a curious proto-neofolk vibe, not a million miles away from what the Chicago duo Changes were up to around the same time. Then, like the group hadn't predicted enough underground subgenres by this point, in between the atonal vocal madness of genitalia and the Gregorian chant meets Jimi Hendrix of Closer, First World of Bronze, we get Toth Scribe Eye, a 10-minute dismantling of Caledonia, in which the tape is slowed down and manipulated to the point that the song winds up as a pile of noisy, incomprehensible sludge. So yeah, basically, if you're a devoted student of the Nurse with Wound list and all things freaky and weird, then this is an essential listen if you haven't already checked it out. However, if you're expecting some far more traditional psychedelia, prog or hard rock going off the front cover, then I'm not sure you're going to find much of what you're after here. We finished today's selection with a hulking double slab of jazz fusion by the legend himself, Miles Davis. Yeah, Big Fun is just one of numerous amazing doubles churned out during his ultra-fertile electric period, which started with the gorgeous Inner Silent Way and the landmark Bitches Brew, both recorded in 1969. Speaking of which, the 4 side-long pieces which make up the main body of Big Fun were captured during separate sessions, starting just after Bitches Brew was completed and extending through to summer 1972, with markedly different lineups each time, ranging from a quintet up to an 11-piece band. Amazingly though, this still sounds all of one piece, even with the inclusion of a whopping 45 minutes of bonus outtakes from the same period. Opener Great Expectations stalks along in a deep, dark and sultry fashion, its dense tangle of polyrhythms and bassy burbling constantly giving way to a curiously catchy, atonal motif, which wouldn't sound out of place as a sting in some old black and white detective thriller. After this elongated intro section, the performance becomes altogether less stifling, opening out into a lovely ambient space, with long peals of trumpet smeared across rich washes of percussion, electric piano, and droning tambura. Ife, the piece from 1972, finds Miles in similar linear jam territory as contemporaneous Funkadelic, Can and James Brown, with a heady, spicy blend of wah trumpet, tritone organ, sax and freaked-out synthesizer floating over a mantric, swampy funk groove, bolstered by James Matume's arsenal of African percussion. Eventually, things quieten down substantially, the piece morphing into a kind of ghostly reflection of itself, still with Michael Henderson's persistent bass line pulsing away underneath. Kicking off the second half is Go Ahead John, recorded by the aforementioned quintet lineup, among them guitar maestro John McLaughlin, as the title suggests. Now, this near 30-minute monster starts life as another bubbling psych funk jam, which is made even trippier and more disorientating by the fact that the tape of the drum track has been electronically modified and maybe even cut up and stuck back together, giving it this weird stop-start swishing effect. After a time, the funk fades out and is replaced by a long stretch of crawling, bluesy sleaze, before it's back to the sweaty madness, the drums sounding even screwier than before, as McLaughlin lets rip with a series of long, fuzzed-out wails. The piece Lonely Fire concludes the album proper, sustaining an enchanting atmosphere of sitar and electric piano-enhanced modal mystery over 21 minutes, starting off freeform, then finding a groove around about halfway through. As for the bonus material, on disc 1, keyboardist Joe Zawinul's tune Recollections is a beautifully chilled out psychedelic modal jam, whilst Trevera is a glorious free-time sonic cascade, which sounds like an entire storage cupboard's worth of instruments falling on your head simultaneously. Disc 2 is rounded out by the laid-back raga funk workout, The Little Blue Frog, first released in an edited form as the B-side to an equally chopped-down version of Great Expectations back in 1970. Then the warm, glowing Yaffe, which builds in volume as it cascades along, bringing to mind the multicultural jams that the group Between also excelled at. So an essential chunk of miles for your fusion collection, provided that's your bag, of course. If you've yet to dive headfirst into this era of Davis's music, this one isn't too bad a place to start. As great as they are, I find Big Fun, along with its 1974 companion Get Up With It, to be a touch more accessible than more heralded works like Bitches Brew and On the Corner, not to mention the punishing live LPs from this era, like Agatha and Pangea, though chances are if you like one, you want to hear them all anyway. Okay, that's just about it for another episode. I've got plenty more videos along similar lines in the works, so please keep your eyes peeled for those. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Feel free to check out the archive for even more content about cool music and movies, and I'll catch you again soon on the Acid Trash Jamboree.